So hello, Zoe. It's really nice to have you with us here as we start to think about International Women's Day 2021. So I'm Fola, and I want to start our conversation by asking you to kindly introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on. So my name's Zoe. My day job is as a life and wellbeing coach. So I've been doing this full time since I was made redundant in 2017. So my background before that, I worked for the police, as well as the day job that I had side roles of coaching, mentoring, and self-development training. So when I was made redundant, I decided to take all of the best bits of everything that I enjoyed doing in that role and make it into a full-time job. So that's what I do now, life and wellbeing coaching under the brand of Phoenix.
Yes, and I love it. I mean, I'm looking at your website and you have words like helping you create the tomorrow you want while learning to love your today. Mm-hmm. And there's somewhere where you talk about Summer 25 being your catalyst to change.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that and your story?
Yeah, sure. So prior to that, I was married. My son at that time was primary school. The marriage wasn't healthy at all. Was abusive, at times violent. And I felt stuck. I felt frustrated with the situation that I was in. I felt very much that I wanted things to change. I wanted him to change. I wanted the whole situation to change. I wanted to find a way out. And as I said, I was working for the police at the time. So it felt like it's difficult, isn't it? Everybody's situation is very personal to them. But I felt very restricted as to who I could turn to for help, pride being one of those things, but just that challenge of who could I open up to. And so, yeah, as you said, there was a catalyst for change, and that was when we lost a friend of ours in the London bombings. It was a really strange situation in, going to her funeral. She was 2 years younger than me. She was my sister's best friend growing up, but we had one of those families where she was always in our house, or, we were in theirs, and it was in one or the other. She was always around. And then at her funeral, just that dawning realization. It's weird, isn't it? When people pass, how people have those conversations about, if she's up there now, she'll be looking down on us, and felt really exposed. I felt almost guilty that I was living this life and hers had been so tragically taken away, and that I was living this life. I had, there were things that I could do. There were things that I could take control of. It wasn't going to be easy by any stretch of the imagination, but I suddenly felt that she'd had her life taken away. And I knew that if I didn't make those changes that I knew that I needed to make, that potentially the next service would be mine. And the weird thing was I was looking around in the church and thinking it would be the same people, it would be the same families, it would be the same friends. And it was just made it very, very real. I mean, it took 12 months for me to go. As you know, these things take some time, and they take time to find a situation where you feel it's as safe as you can to move on from that situation. Yeah, it came a year after, and then just lots and lots of years of building myself back up. And it's weird because I talk to people now, and people say, I want to go back to who I was. And I believe, in my opinion and from my experience, you can't go back, but you can build and move forward. And I work with a variety of people now who feel stuck and frustrated in a number of situations. But I think that it is about helping people to find a way to move forward and find, as you said, find the love in where they are now, as well as focusing on where they want to get to. So that's my journey in a nutshell. There was lots of things that happened in that rebuild that weren't planned, weren't expected. But yeah, nevertheless, it was that taking that first step after what happened, and then just keeping that momentum of moving forwards.
Thank you, Zoe, for sharing that and for being so open and transparent. Because one of the groups I know you work with, and you mentioned it in your story, are domestic abuse survivors. And you talk about a program that you run for them. Now, we know that with COVID and everything, that's been one of the highlights around some of the challenges that we are having to deal with. So what would you say, based on your experience as a life and well-being coach, to somebody who may be stuck in a situation like that, or who may know somebody who's stuck in that kind of situation? What would you say to them, or what advice would you give?
I think there's two conversations there, isn't there? There's the conversation with the person who's in that situation. Coaching and how I see things is very much about empowering that individual to take ownership and take the steps that they are ready to take when they are ready to take them, and being that support to that person. And I think for the person who's having the conversation with them, it's very much about asking how you can support them, asking what they need from you, not pushing them to make decisions based on what you feel they should be doing, not pushing them to take action in a way they're not yet ready to do that, but asking that individual how you can support them and how you can help them with that empowerment to take control, take ownership. And I think especially with, domestic abuse, coercive control, that person, that individual has had that removed. They've had that taken away from them. And I think sometimes, even though it's with great intention, people continue to do that, of that coercion of, you need to do this, and this is what you have to do. And for me, the steps for those journeys is not being part of that, but giving people the space and support and guidance for them to do that at their own pace when they're ready.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. Now I want to take us back to 2020, because 2020 was the year like we hadn't seen before. So I want to ask you about your own personal reflections of 2020, especially as the woman, as a business owner in the field that you work in. Any joys, any highlights, any learnings that you think we can hold on to?
Yeah, 2020. It was a crazy year, wasn't it? And I'm very fortunate in that I was already online. So I made the decision when I started the business. I made the decision to work online as much as possible, because in my experience, having the opportunities as a woman, as a parent, as somebody who's also employed, to be able to get support, to work on yourself, to focus on yourself and your self-development is restricted, because a lot of these things were, they were on a certain evening, they were at a certain location. So you had to arrange childcare, you had to get transport. I was a shift worker for a long time, so I couldn't commit to every Monday evening at 8:00. That wasn't possible for me. So when I started the business, it was a conscious decision to try and make coaching as accessible as possible to people, and being online was part of that. So when everything happened last year and people were working from home, there weren't any really big changes for me, and especially from a business perspective. And because of the type of coaching that I do, and I work with people who have anxiety and depression and struggle with overwhelm, for me, being that constant and not making any changes was good for me and good for the people that I worked with, because it meant in that state of chaos, when everything else was disrupted, I was still me doing my thing, and it was the same, it wasn't changed. But I lost a lot of the things that balance out work for me now. A lot of the things that I do when I'm not working, the things that I'd worked really hard for, when you first start a business, it's long hours, it's relentless. So I just started to get into that flow of good number of hours, but having that time out as well. And then all of those things just stopped. It's like the gym's closed. I couldn't go and watch basketball anymore. A lot of the things that I did for downtime just disappeared. So for me, it was about finding that balance of, okay, there's work and there's housework. There must be some other things that I can fill my time with. So I went back to reading. I started reading again. I signed up for Audible. So on my daily Boris walks, I would put, personal development type books into my headset, but then I would sit with Kindle and read crime thrillers, romance novels in the evening, just to switch off. So it was, for me, it was just the balance shifted, and it was about finding, okay, what can I do instead that I haven't had time for, I haven't made time for a long time, that I can do differently. So it was a shift. There was a shift there, but I think, having, especially in this line of work, I know that there's been people that have had a lot more challenges. I think everybody has had a challenge, but people have had different challenges in different ways. So I think people have very much reflected on what's important, because there's nothing that highlights more, is there, what's important when it gets taken away. But I think also there was a shift for people in the, that when I talk about loving your today, I think there were lots of things that people are like, oh, why do I do this? Why am I commuting? Why can't I work from home? Why can't I spend more time with the family? I think homeschooling is probably most people will be quite happy to hand that back, but I think not commuting, the flexibility of working from home, and I think, especially for people who are the main carer, I think there's lots of where the world has shifted, there'll be lots of benefits in that, in how the working world looks moving forward. So I think there are some wins in there. I mean, health aside, but I think also people have really sat back and thought, okay, am I looking after myself? Am I doing as much as I could be, as much as I want to be? Is my health and well-being priority? And I think a lot of people have reassessed that as well. So I think there have been some wins in there. It's felt like a bit of a shift for me. It's not been the seismic shift that it has been for some, but there was a shift there.
So what would you say your book of 2020 would be? So what would that be? Which book would you say was the big highlight for you in 2020?
Oh, that's a good question. So I read, I was reading like a book a month, so there were lots in there. The James Clear Atomic Habits, that's been quite it's been interesting, because it's one of those books that people always assume that I have read, and I hadn't read it. So it's great because it talks about lots of the things that I work with people, but it sort of broadens that knowledge. For me, I've read so many. I think for me, it's that switch off, it being able to just disappear in that world of. But I think there's lots of books that I have read last year, and they all made a difference at a different time. I think the James Clear Atomic Habits, especially when in this time at the moment, I think that's a really useful book for people to read. And The Happiness Project, I really enjoyed that. So Gretchen Rubin's project of different areas of focus over the 12 months. And I think that was a really interesting book to read, because it has the personal touch, because she talks about how she applies it, but also it has the scientific research and the evidence base behind it. So I really enjoyed that one as well. Those are probably the top two. The Kindle fiction books, they just get lost in, and they're all sort of psychological thrillers. So it's not everybody's cup of tea, but certainly the books that I had on Audible were brilliant.
So now I'm going to ask you about 2021 and sort of ask you, what are your hopes and aspirations for 2021? And I'm going to ask you a subsequent question, which I may as well ask you now, that if you had one word of hope for our women in 2021, what would you say to them?
For me, it's growth. I'm not somebody who particularly plans ahead. I tend to plan in sort of 3-month cycles. I've never been somebody who's had that 3 to 5 year plan of what I want to achieve. And, I have a 3-month plan and don't always look much further than that. But for me, my kind of goal this year is growth, personal and professional growth, and, just to grow, continue to grow the business. This is year 4 for me. So I think it's that. I think a lot of people in business, they say, don't they, those first sort of 3 years, you start to find what you want to do. And so I feel now like I'm really starting to do that. Last year, with this extra time, because I couldn't go anywhere, I did another coaching qualification. So I feel there's opportunities this year to put some of these new practices, new techniques in with people that I'm working with, which means that I can again grow not the volume of clients, but the complexity of clients that I can work with. So I definitely want to apply that. But there's also going to be changes this year. My son is at the age due to go off to university, whatever happens with that. So there'll be some personal change there, because I will have gone from that primary role as a mother for the last 18 years, that the dynamics for that are changing. I mean, he hasn't needed me in the same way for a long time, but just even in not having him living here and that permanent move, I think that will be a change for me as well. But again, that's a personal growth. It's finding a new roles or new elements to step into, I guess.
You will find them. I mean, talking about my life with 3 kids who have gone and now have come back, I'll just tell you that it's opportunity to grow, and it all changes for the good. It's a good journey.
Yeah.
So growth is the word. Growth is the word for us for 2021, and there's so many opportunities.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I think growth is evolution. I think it's growth for me. And I think with everything that's changing and with all of the things that happen in 2020 around equality, around how society is, how our communities work together to move things forward, I think growth feels part of that. I think there's opportunities for growth this year.
Yeah. Thank you. Now I'm going to ask you specifically to come back to the theme for the International Women's Day, which this is Choose to Challenge. And that's about creating an inclusive world and also recognizing that from challenge comes change. So my question to you is, what are you choosing to challenge as part of this theme, and why?
I love this theme. When I was looking into what sort of the direction and the theme they were set in, I love this theme. I mean, it's one of the things that I talk through with people that I work with is reflect and review, challenge to change. So it's one of those things that, it's one of those sort of a key element for me with people that I work with. Is you reflect and review what's working, what's not working, what works well that you want to do more of, what's not working that you want to start to change, and then challenge to change. So it's a great hashtag for me. But I think even just in terms of what it stands for, a lot of the work that I do is about helping individuals remove their limiting beliefs, helping them to find their voice, supporting people to step forward when opportunities arise, and not saying no to themselves because they think other people are going to say no, and having that confidence to step forward. So certainly through work where possible, I will volunteer my time with youth groups where I can support young people to find their voice, to be able to speak up for the things that they're passionate about, for what they believe in. And I also, where possible, support young women in sport, because I think that's, again, another area of growth. Lots of opportunities, lots of things are starting to change, but some of the conversations around it certainly need to be challenged. So I sponsor a young female basketballer. She's got huge potential, and I want to be able to support her and part of her journey, and the young girls that play in the team, to be able to support them with their confidence on and off court, because these are young women with successful futures ahead of them. So being able to support that. But yeah, that challenge is tough, because I think there's that pressure, isn't there, to step forward, but there's also that pressure to keep the status quo, to keep things as they are, because people fear the change. They fear what will change for them if other people start stepping up. If everybody is equal, what happens to me? And it's like, well, that's the point. Everybody becomes equal. So everybody gets the same opportunities. But I think people fear change. They fear how it might impact them. So sometimes the conversations that I have are helping people to see the opportunities and not be fearful of things changing around them. So there's one conversation with young women about how they can step in and be part of the change, but also conversations with people who fear what that might mean for them and being able to support them. So sort of two-way.
Excellent. And it's interesting because this morning I was reflecting and I wrote the words down, stepping out of the shadows. I think that's a bit of what you're saying, stepping out of, into places, and that takes change, and that takes a lot of courage. So Great to hear what you're saying. We've come to the end, but I just want to give you an opportunity. If there's anything else you'd like to say to the women listening,
Oh, the case would be to stop me from talking. Normally, not. But I think if there's anything from the work that I do now, from my own experiences along the way, that challenging yourself to change quite often starts in your head. It's the internal conversation that you start to have with yourself. That first step doesn't have to be a huge step. That first step of challenging yourself to change, that first step out of the shadows, doesn't have to be a really big significant change. Lots of smaller steps will still get you where you want to get to, but that first step is definitely the most important.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Zoe. It's been lovely talking to you, and thanks for being part of International Women's Day 2021. Thank you very much.
Thank you.